Okay, great. Okay, hi everyone.
You should probably
I'm Tanya, Janca. They're going to sway my feed. I'm going to share examples and their feed later.
And then
so,
ways to create
it's
a
Microsoft and a lot of nerdy things. I'm part of the OWASP DevSol project. And today I want to talk about if you're ready for the worst. And personally, I think instant response is the worst. Okay, great.
Okay,
Hi everyone.
You should probably
I'm Tanya Janca. They're going to sway my feed. I'm going to share examples and their feed later.
and then
And
so
it feels like you're doing
Microsoft
and a lot of nerdy things. I'm part of
but I also
the
find it
DevSol
really
project.
stressful, especially if
Today I
work
want to
at a
talk
place
about
where
if you're ready for the
everyone's
worst.
and no one else
And
knows
personally, I think instant
what they're
response is
supposed
the
to be
worst.
doing.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Hi everyone.
You should probably
Especially if I want to talk about if you're ready for the worst.
and no one else
And
knows
personally, I think
what
instant
they're
response
supposed
is
to
the
be
worst.
doing.
Okay, great. Hi everything.
You should probably
Ruined our app or broken it or done something to it that we weren't expecting. They have no idea where to start. Yeah. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? So we are going to talk about preparing for an incident. This is going to be at least 80 or 90% of the talk. Because if we are prepared well, we will have less incidents. And when we have an incident, it will be short and sweet. And then two, we're going to talk about during an incident, what do you do? Okay. So first of all, this is me. I'm Tanya Janca. I'm a big nerd, and on the internet I'm called She Hacks Purple because I am a purple teamer. So I'm not red team, as in attacking, I'm not blue team like defending. I tend to do both, hence the purple. And then I work for a little startup. You might have heard of us before. And I have a very strange job. I'm Tanya Janca.
I do developer relations.
I advocate on behalf of software developers in regards to security. So I made a slide to explain what that means because everyone's always like, I don't understand what your job is, hence the purple. So I get feedback from the community and get them to change things so that it's better. And I have a very strange job. I do security research, I release it, I create content on how to do things. A bunch of people ask me all the same questions. Like, how do I do this? To explain it, then I probably should make a video or write a blog post or something like that. And then I get to do cool things like this, like speak at community events. So hi everyone, thanks for coming. Thank you everyone in Vancouver. I'm sorry I can't physically be there. I'm on the island right next to you in Victoria. Some things came up, and yeah, how do I do this? Okay, so I consider myself an application security evangelist, and I'm not like this guy. I am just like this guy with all the happy. So hi everyone, thanks for coming around me. Thank you everyone in Vancouver. I'm sorry I can't totally obsessed with OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project. I realize that you are at an OWASP meeting right now, but sometimes people don't realize. So I consider myself we do so many things. Like I'm part of the Ottawa chapter. I'm one of their leaders, and then I'm also part of a project, the DevSol project. Thank you everyone in Vancouver. You can see the little purple Care Bear there. I feel that we are the Care Bears of security, trying to help everyone in the entire world make applications that are more secure. Yeah, we're thousands of volunteers. We make software, we write books, everything's free because we really want the internet to be a safer place. I helped start a meetup in Ottawa called WIST, Women in Security and Technology. We have chapters all over. Yeah, and it's a meetup for women in security to like do cool stuff. We crash meetups together, give each other workshops, help each other find mentors and jobs, things like that. So if you're a woman and you want to join, let me know because we definitely want you. So I've been a nerd like a really long time. And basically my whole goal and the reason why I do these things is because I feel that security is too hard, especially for developers. It's ridiculous. I feel like you have to do 10,000 extra steps to try to make something secure, and I want to change the way our industry does things so the default of everything is secure. And if you want to make something insecure, you have to work really hard at it. So that is one of my personal career goals. But with that, that's like a lot of stuff about me, but that's not what you came here for. You came here for instant response. So first I'm gonna start with a couple earlier you are in the system development lifecycle, right? So if we start security at the beginning and do it the whole way through, that would be shifting left, right? The earlier you start security, the more you're shifting left. And I say pushing left because sometimes I'm not invited. But we definitely need to start security at the beginning. So it means doing security from the start and the whole way through. So pushing right is a thing that I have started saying affectionately. So I've done a lot of incident response. I get invited in at the end a lot because the first time they're looking at security is when something awful has happened, right? And so they do it there after the release when it's just the worst possible time to do it. So a security incident is the most expensive, embarrassing, and damaging situation to deal with a security problem or a vulnerability. It's humiliating, it ruins your reputation as a company, it's costly, it takes time to recover, and it's much, much, much less expensive to push left and deal with security problems earlier on. So sometimes I'll affectionately say, oh, they're really pushing right because they're just doing nothing for security and they're just crossing their fingers. That's their entire risk management plan. And obviously that's bad. Okay, so now like what is a security incident and what is a security event? Because they're definitely different. So a security incident or a security event is when something's happened, but you don't know if something bad has happened. So you're suspecting something's wrong. You're not sure if it's related to security. It's something you have to go check out. And then a security incident is when something for sure has happened that's bad. And either it has happened or it is happening, but you are certain something is bad. So an example, if you find your company's data for sale on the dark web, you have a security incident. That's definitely an incident. That's definitely bad. Yeah. Okay. So throughout this talk, I might say IR or incident response. So incident response is an organized approach to addressing and managing the aftermath of a security breach or IT incident. So the goal is to handle the situation, trying to limit the damage and reduce the recovery time and the costs. So that the idea is being organized, making things go back to the way they were as soon as possible, recovering, fixing, and then figuring out what happened and making sure it never happens again. But we're going to talk about that. Okay, so what is AppSec or application security? So any activity that you do in efforts to push left or in efforts to secure your application is part of application security. So if you do a penetration test, a secure code review, if you run a bunch of security scanning tools on your software, that's AppSec. But other things, for instance, upgrading your framework because you know there's a known vulnerability that's really bad and you don't want your app to be vulnerable to that. Or for instance, let's say if you were going to grep through your source code looking for a function that you know is no longer really very secure and there's something out that's better and you want to replace it, all of those things are considered part of application security. So when I say AppSec, I mean any type of activity like that, whether it's formal or not. Okay, so application security is a problem. For 2016 and 2017, application security issues were the #1 thing that caused breaches, which is obviously very bad, according to the Verizon breach report. And then application security as a topic is hardly ever or not at all covered in school, meaning developers get out of school and they have no training in this, and then security teams quite often don't have any training on it, and then they're all just winging it and doing their best. And so we end up having, like when we have an incident, sometimes it's really, really, truly awful because we're just so unprepared for it. Okay, so now the talk is starting. Enough of the beginning of the talk. Let's talk about preparing for an incident and doing all sorts of things to ensure we don't have an incident. And then we're going to talk about during an incident. So my tagline here is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Definitely an ounce of AppSec costs several pounds of incident response. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so first of all, I'm gonna give you just a would you use? There's probably a framework. If you have to update .NET from 4.5 to 4.6, that's really easy. But if you have to do it from 2.0 to 4.7, that's a rewrite. So if you can keep upgrading regularly, it's so much cheaper and it will be much, much, much more secure. And then patch your servers. I know that servers don't seem like an application security problem, but I mean, if they can get into your app via your server, you're still in trouble. So this is the most obvious advice ever. Please, please, please do it. And then I have this is fine, but it's not really fine. This is what I look like when I'm managing an incident. I'm like, don't worry, everyone, I've got it. I know the world's burning around me, but we got this, we can do it. I realized that in a lot of organizations, this is really difficult. And this is why we created DevOps. And this is why we've started doing site reliability engineering and started doing operations in new ways. So if your organization is having problems keeping up with patching and like keeping your frameworks up to date, you might want to examine like your whole structure around doing IT. Because a lot of people are like, well, it's impossible where I work. So then maybe that's the thing you need to look at. But that is another topic I like to talk about, which I'm not talking about here. Okay, next. So yeah, it's not fine. Okay, so incident response process for your organization. So your organization should have a process. I'm just gonna check to see if, yeah. Okay, great. I'm just checking to see if anyone's asking questions. Okay, I've worked at a few places where well, one place in particular where I got there and the previous incident manager showed me this really awesome looking incident response process. They had it approved. It was really cool, but they had not showed it to anyone else. So the first time we had an incident, no one followed it because they'd never heard of it, and they ruined the chain of custody. All sorts of bad things happened. And so the most important thing about your incident response process is to create it and then tell every single person you work with about it. So tell them what their role is and what you expect from them. So if they're help desk, maybe their role is just to call you. Or if it's a developer, maybe, if the incident has to do with their application, don't go home till you've talked to us, because maybe we're going to have questions. We are definitely going to have questions for you. And like, what should management do? Sometimes management's most important role is making sure everyone remains calm. You need to train people regularly about the response you expect from them so they know. I've definitely had a help desk person try to be a hero and fix it themselves, and they ended up scaring the crap out of everyone ever because they're telling everyone, and it turned out there wasn't even a security problem happening. It was just bad latency. And but they caused like quite a scare for everyone by not following the process because my team had not trained them properly. So that was us, not that help desk person trying to do the best job they could. So I would suggest that giving people a refresher once a year. I think most places should do security training once a year, especially if you have specialized roles. So if you're a sysadmin, if you're a developer, help desk, there's probably special security training that you need. And so if you're refreshing everyone on this once a year, you can make this part of the training. Everyone needs to know who to call, so you should have one phone number. It should not be a switching phone number. They should not have to remember, oh, it's Tanya's turn, it's Ed's turn, it's Jen's turn. There should just be one number. And every single person in IT has a job, and a lot of them, their job is don't touch anything and call us, please. And letting them know that they can trust you, you're not going to yell at them, and you're going to help them, it's pretty important. Okay, so incident response. So why create your own process when you can copy really awesome ones? So SANS has one that's great. NIST has one that's great. I think I'm going to share a whole bunch of different resources throughout this talk. So if you want to, you can just take a screenshot of this, or you can watch the recording later. Okay, so next. So if you have a security team and you expect them to respond to incidents, they need training. So every single person on your security team ideally would have incident management training, because you can't have one incident manager, because that means if your incident manager gets sick, is tired, or whatever, like you can only manage an incident for so many hours straight, and then you're not doing a good job anymore. And so you want to definitely have 2 or more. You would want them to have forensics training. You'd want them to practice doing red team and blue team exercises. You would want them to simulate incidents so that they could practice. You would want to do detection, monitoring, more. I guess the point I'm trying to make on this slide is that if you plan to have an in-house incident response team, it's going to cost you money. And I've worked at places where we have one, and that's great. And then I've worked at places where the incident response team is one person who can wipe computers and reinstall them, and then they call out if it's more serious than that. And that is an absolutely acceptable plan, and way to do it is just knowing when you need to call for help, because it's quite costly to have an incident response team that's fully trained. But assuming you're going to have one because you work at a place that is not for people, you work at a big company. Oh yeah. So Nmap is your friend. Nmap's my friend. Every security person, it is your friend. So basically the first thing you want to do once everyone's had some training and you know everyone knows how to manage an incident and you have a process, you need to figure out what you're protecting. And that's why Nmap is your friend. So if you are in the cloud, this is slightly different because you can just look in your subscription and you should be able to see everything. But if you're in a traditional data center, you might not know all the things that you have. And so you want to use Nmap to make sure, just basically do a discovery scan of everything. If port 443 or port 80 are open, it's probably a web server, you might want to visit it. Many times I've been in an incident and people are telling me about an app that's down. I had no idea I was supposed to be protecting something there. Obviously that's not good. So having an inventory is the best thing ever. So you want to make the most valuable Excel spreadsheet known to man. And you want to put all of this stuff in there and have it run Nmap a lot. And if you can have it like auto update, this would be really great, but you need to know what you're protecting or you can't protect it. So application inventory and discovery. I should warn you that if you have not done this before, you probably have 30% more applications than you realized, and that'll be fun to find out. Yeah, okay. So if you're in the cloud, Nmap's unnecessary because they will do, the cloud provider should do this for you. Okay, so up next. So you can't protect it if you're not aware that you have it, right? So you need to document your tech stack. What programming languages does your office use? So I've worked at places where all we do is Java or all we do is .NET. But then I've worked at places where their tech stack is like a wild safari of like everything you could possibly think of, like stuff that I've never even heard of before. And like I've worked in tech a long time, and if someone's coming out with things I haven't heard of, it's usually like pretty scary. So programming languages, APIs, frameworks, libraries. Which operating systems do you run on your servers? Do you only run Windows? Do you only run Linux? Do you run 500 different flavors of Linux? You probably do. What configurations do you have? Do you have a standardization on configurations? Are people keeping to the standardization? Ugh. You'd want to know about your firewalls, what's open, what's closed, inputs and outputs and integrations between different systems. This is going to seem really daunting. But if you know, for instance, like we're a Ruby house, that's all we do, or Ruby shop, then that means that's all you need to pay attention to, right? But if you have a bunch of .NET apps as well, you need to pay attention to that as well. You can save yourself a lot of time if you know for sure what you have and what you don't have. Okay, enough of a lecture on this. Okay. Oh, and you can use tools like dependency check or Sneak, Black Duck. I think Synopsys makes, Sonatype makes something, Weight Source Bolt. There's a whole bunch of tools that you can use that I think you should use to scan your code, and it will tell you all the different libraries and other things that you're using, and it will just give you a summary of many of these things, not all of them, but it'll tell you what things are out of date and insecure and suggest options. But more importantly, in regards to this specifically, is it'll just let you know what you have, so you don't have to manually go look for it, so it could save you a lot of time. Next, you want to stay informed about what's going on. So you want to know about threats. So if you can afford a threat feed, you should get one. Or if you work at a place like I do, that little startup, Microsoft, we create our own threat feed because we're pretty big. But you can buy a threat feed from various companies. CSIRC, so that's from Canada, we have an RRS feed, and we also have security bulletins and technical reports, and all of it's free and open to the public, and it's not necessarily Canadian specific. And I know the American government does this, and I'm pretty sure that the European Union does this as well. So depending upon where you are in the world, there's options for you, but we are in Canada, this meetup, so you would probably want to check out CSIRC. Okay, so there's the US cert. Someone else was telling me you could use Swamp in a Box, which is free. I have not tried it, so I can't tell you that it's good, but I've definitely used the CSIRC stuff, and it's good. Okay, threats number 2, more. So there's a lot of different interesting ways that you can sign up to learn more about what's going on. So CVE details, so you can sign up to find out when new CVEs come out, but CVEs are pretty late. Listen to podcasts, monitor Twitter. A lot of companies have alerts set up in Google and Twitter and other social medias for the name of their company, and then down, hacked, breach. I know that sounds really low tech, but it works. It works really fast. Like WannaCry spilled out onto Twitter way before anyone got alerts in any of these feeds. So keeping track of those things are a good way to learn about stuff. Sign up for security updates on your entire tech stack. So if you use .NET, sign up for our stuff. If you use Ruby, Python, all of those things, WordPress has a security feed, so you should sign up for it. Monitor recent breaches of other companies to see if you can learn from it. So Equifax, it was a struts problem, like a Java struts framework problem, and if you can learn from their mistake and upgrade or just switch frameworks depending upon your opinion, you could end up learning from their mistake, and that's really nice. Okay, anything else you can think of? So if there's anything you can think of, you should do it. If people are like, oh, that seems like a silly idea, but you're getting information, just do it anyway. I think you should worry less about what other people think. I've heard lots of people say, like, I'm not going to, put an alert on Twitter for the name of my company and breach. That's silly, but a lot of companies do that, and it doesn't matter if it's low tech. If it works, it works. Okay, oh, more cloud threats. So turn on threat protection. Turn on all of the security features in your cloud provider. So cloud providers are gigantor, all of them. And they have their own threat feeds that are specific to their clouds and the things that come native in their cloud. So you want to use their protection features because they are all over this. They want you to have good security experiences. So they are working extra hard to make sure things go well for you in the cloud. So turn on their security features. So threat protection, monitoring, turn on whatever security features that they offer. So if they have a dashboard, also, a thing that a lot of people forget to do, add your contact information. So your cloud provider will actually phone you if something is very bad. Make sure you set up email alerts. I know that sounds annoying, but having them call you when something goes really bad is very, 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 very valuable. But they can't do it if you haven't provided proper information. It will not protect against all application security issues, but it protects against a bunch depending upon your cloud provider, and it's totally worth doing. Okay, now let's talk about WAF, a web application firewall. So OWASP creates a free WAF called Mod Security, and then they create a rule set, which are regular expressions, like a list of signatures of bad input, and that's called the core rule set. So you can add a WAF. Let me explain what a WAF is, a web application firewall. So what is a WAF? So here's the OSI model. A traditional firewall protects on the network level, but a WAF protects at the application level. So if your application is exposed to the internet, it's not protected by a firewall. Like a firewall will protect all of the other ports, but if you have port 80 or port 443 open with your web server, or your load balancer, whatever way you're doing it, that means that part is open, and people who are using your app, if they can break into your app, let's say with an injection vulnerability or cross-site scripting, getting you to run their malicious code, they can break right into your network like that. So what a WAF does is it looks at all of the requests coming to your app, and if it looks like it's malicious, it rejects it. A lot of our industry is split about a WAF because there's latency issues, and if you make the rules quite strict, that means you could potentially block legitimate business traffic, but if you make them too lax, it only blocks ridiculously obvious attacks, and so the jury's kind of out as to if people should use them or not. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. Here's why I think you should get a WAF. Okay, so this is the way I view a WAF. So it's like a shield. I think that everyone should have mod security running all the time because it's free, it's open source from OWASP, so that you can write signatures in it in case of emergency. So I've worked at various places. One of the places had struts, and you know, the thing that knocked down Equifax was a 0-day in struts. There were 3 0 days the same year, which made, I'm surprised all my hair is not gray. But if you have a WAF, what you can do is release a signature that looks like whatever 0-day is out there, or whatever vulnerability that is in your framework is out there, and then just block any requests that look anything like that. Because generally, great big attacks don't look like normal user input. And if you just like stop those in their tracks before they even get to your application, you know, by writing this one line of code, this means that all of a sudden you're not vulnerable to a 0-day. And then that means I can sleep really well at night. Yes, that's great. So this is why I feel that everyone should have a WAF. I'm not going to talk about turning on the rest of the rules or anything like that, or commercial WAFs and how much they cost. No comment on any of that because I know our audience is really split, but I think you should have one just in case a 0-day is being exploited in the wild. There's no patch, or it's in your framework. You can't just update a framework in a few hours, especially if you have thousands of custom apps using the same framework. So a WAF can protect you in situations like that. Okay, so now let's talk about enterprise security. Just kidding. So at this point, I want to remind you that we're just talking about things that affect applications, and that I'm not covering enterprise security in this talk on purpose, or network security. So I'm not going to talk about firewalls, admin rights, lockdown, malware defenses, perimeter protections, monitoring, logging, IPS, that's intrusion prevention systems, intrusion detection systems, host intrusion prevention systems, IPS, IDS, HIPS, etc. I'm not talking about those things. I'm just talking about AppSec, and I don't want people to think like she missed some really obvious stuff. This talk would be a full day training then. Okay, so now let's talk about backups. So usually this is where I ask the audience who does backups, and then I get people to put their hands up. So think in your head if you do backups and think about it. Okay, so now who does rollbacks? Who practices rolling back their backups to make sure that they actually can access them and actually can roll them out in a realistic amount of time? There's a lot of hands go down for this one. I worked somewhere once and we lost, 4 hours worth of production time on all of our apps and everything. And we asked them if they could roll back, and they explained to us it would take them at least 3 weeks to roll back. And to me, that it just blew my mind. So everyone lost a day of work, and that's extremely expensive. I think we had 2,000 employees when I worked there. That's 2,000 people having to redo their work for the day. And I know it doesn't take a whole day to read. You have to remember what you were doing, whether that be anyway, it's time consuming, extremely expensive. So if you haven't practiced rolling back your backups and you don't know if they actually work, your backups might actually be totally useless. So that is an important exercise. Another thing you're going to need is, if you're going to do instant responses, investigation tools. You need to be able to see what's happening. I've worked places where I don't have the right tools, and then it's 10 times worse than it needs to be. So I like to have a copy of Metasploit. So if there's live exploits happening in the wild at the moment, I want to go online and try to get a copy, make my own Metasploit module, and then test it in a safe environment. I do not use Metasploit on a regular basis. This is just for when like there's exploits out in the wild. I want a copy of Nessus, Nexpose, OpenVAS, like whatever vulnerability or VA networking infrastructure tool that you have, because they often have they'll have a module come out just to test things that are out and also just to see if you're vulnerable in general. I definitely always want a copy of Burp Suite Pro and OWASP Zap. So that's if it's like an application problem specifically, especially if I have a copy of the attack, so I can go and try the attack and walk through and see what happens. I need log viewing software. Trying to open up a 60 gig log in Notepad is not good. Log viewing software is really important. You also need to remember that your team needs to have training, and then they need to have access. So I worked at a place once where they're like, well, you have Nessus, but there was 100 firewalls in the way, and there was no dev area where I could test or QA or safe space. And so I was like, thanks for buying me Nessus, but like I can't actually use it, right? So you need to make sure that you actually have access, and then training to use these tools. Again, like you can't, there's no point in buying these tools if your team doesn't know how to use them. Okay, if you use the cloud, these things are slightly different. So a lot of the cloud providers provide their own VA tools and will have their own log viewing tools. And it depends on your cloud, and I don't want to talk about each specific cloud because I only know about the one that my company makes. And so then I will only give you information on that one, and it'll be biased because I like them. So whichever cloud provider you have, you want to check out and make sure that you have log viewing software, you have access to the logs and all of that. Okay, next. What should you log? So every application should log to a centralized place, hopefully in the same format, and ideally it feeds into some sort of application SIM, or it has some sort of alerting set up, but what to log. So if you didn't log it, did it even happen? I'm just going to check to make sure there's no questions at this point, because okay, no, everything's fine. Okay, if you write custom apps, they need to do logging. Whom, so which system, which part of the system, what user caused the event, what type of event, when, so a date stamp ideally, and make sure that the timestamp is correct. I made an event for a meetup event for my meetup to invite people, and then it did it in my home time zone instead of the time zone of my computer when I made it. So I'm really sorry to people that showed up 2 hours or 3 hours early. I apologize. Meetup didn't let me choose which time zone. There's no option for me to fix it, which stinks. So which part of the app did the event occur? Was it successful, unsuccessful, and the payload? If there is something that is questionable, you want to make sure you roll back the event. That's a whole other thing that's design, and we're not going to talk about that, but you always want to fail closed or fail safe and roll back things if there's a transaction happening or there's suspicious activity. Do not log sensitive information such as passwords, social insurance numbers, combinations that are sensitive such as home address, name, and dates of birth. Okay, and logs need to be saved. They need to be protected, so they need to be saved to a server that is not the same as your app server, and ideally they can be consumable by your SIM. That's an extra step. You want to work with your security team to make sure that happens, but ideally, like, it would be so beautiful if you have some sort of alerting set up on all your custom apps. Okay, so now let's talk about access. More than once I've been at work quite late managing an incident and then realized I don't have access to things and everyone else is in bed. And then all of a sudden my incident gets a lot more complex than it needs to be. So I want to be able to see the database logs. I want to be able to see the web server logs. I need to see the source code. I'm going to need credentials to log into these things or know who I can contact to make sure I can get credentials. I need log viewing software. I need code review software. So if you write all your code in Eclipse or like Visual Studio, I need a copy of that software so that I can look at it. Opening up a 20,000 line, 400 file bit of code and then looking at it in Notepad stinks. It's awful. I need a safe place to do destructive testing. Ideally, there's an area where I can run exploits safely and see if we're vulnerable or not. Because sometimes you're not actually vulnerable and you're worrying for nothing. And everything but it really, really, really sucks to have, it's like 1 a.m. and here you are trying to test things, but then it turns out your credentials don't work anymore and they expired like 6 months ago. When an incident happens, you will be thankful you tested these things. And then documentation about where each tool is. That's important. And now on to disaster recovery. Also, yeah. So disaster recovery is having a place to recover to. We're also going to talk about BCPs, business continuity plans. So a business continuity plan is part of like regular risk management. What happens if your app goes down? Can your business still survive? How long can it survive? What do you do in case bad things happen? And are you ready? So do you have backup locations? Are your backups cold, warm, or hot? So for instance, if you have, or cloudy, so if you have a cloud provider, you can back up in the same cloud provider, you just check some boxes, or you can back up to a different cloud provider. A lot of people are doing a hybrid solution where they're using more than one cloud provider. Or if you have a traditional data center and you do everything, if you have 2 traditional data centers, you can have one go over to the other. Is everything off? Is everything in standby? Is everything on and hot and ready to go? This is expensive, but it is worth its weight in gold if you have a disaster. If critical infrastructure goes down, do you have a plan for that? I worked somewhere once and our data center, the entire city went down. And so our data center went down and we had something like 90 seconds to shut everything down. And we did surprisingly well. But what do you do from there? How long does it take you to get back up? It's a big deal when a data center goes down. Do you have cell phones? Do you have landlines? I worked somewhere once and they explained that if the internet went down, that they had mobile internet, and then they had cell phones, satellite phones, landlines, and then they actually had like a plan with physical paper. And I found it really interesting how they had backup plans. Like they had plan A, B, C, D, and then they also had like several emergency backup plans, and it was really quite incredible. They had like multiple different phone companies on purpose to make sure like if one went down, they had another one, and like they meant business. It's quite impressive. Yeah, so they had a full plan to do everything on paper. They actually worked, it was really quite impressive. The cloud can also help you with this. Right? So if you have your own traditional data center, you could also have like a live backup in the cloud somewhere or vice versa. Because yeah, you definitely don't want to have your own backup in the same building or ideally even in the same city, because if a huge tornado goes by, you could be in serious trouble. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about something that not everyone agrees on, but I feel that practicing for the big day is really important. So at least once per year, I think that it's highly advisable to simulate a security incident and involve multiple people so that they practice and figure out what's happening. You should tell them it's an incident. Don't scare the pants off of people for no reason. I used to work at Elections Canada, and 6 months before the election, they simulate a full entire fake election. So they actually create a place where you would go vote with all the physical machines, the network, it connects to a full dev site, everything, and they run a complete fake election. They invite a whole bunch of hackers and they throw just tons of security incidents in, and then they learn And then they publish everything. And then, when the election happened, it was smooth like butter. It was so great. We learned so much during the simulation that, just things that you might not even think of. Like one of the printers did really small printing and it was font size 6 or something and no one could read it. And then that was super unhelpful. So we ended up increasing the print size, which might not sound like a big thing to you, but if no one can read something that has to be read, that's completely useless, right? And it's not a thing that you want to deal with during a big event. So running an incident simulation is a really, really good idea to make sure you know what you're doing. Okay, so this is similar to the advice that you should patch everything. Scan everything ever. So get a copy, all of your apps and all your servers. I know that a lot of people will argue, scanning is not that great. It misses lots of things. Well, guess what? It finds lots of things and it's very, very fast, right? So you can scan your whole network. You can scan all of your apps really safely and you can do it in a day, depending. It's really also quite inexpensive because there's lots of free or very cheap tools that you can do to do this, and then fix all of those things. Because if you can scan those apps and find those things in 5 seconds, that means that a kid that has a really bad attitude that lives in his or her parents' basement that's very angry at society can also find those things. And you want to make sure that if anything's really easy to find, that it's fixed, right? Ideally, no one will hack you, but we especially want to make sure that if someone does attack you, that it's very, very, very difficult to get in. So scan everything ever. Beg people to fix what you find. This is a very valuable activity. I think everyone should do this. Okay, so I'm not talking in this talk about an AppSec program. So one of the best things you could do is launch an AppSec program, a full application formalized security program where you work with developers, you teach them, you formalize it as part of your system development lifecycle process. I'm not including that in this talk because, again, this would be multi-day training and I was told I have an hour. So secure coding, design, threat modeling, all those things. I love talking about this. It's my favorite topic, but that's not what this talk is about. And I just wanted to remind you that's why I'm not covering it. Okay, so during an incident, what do we do now? So the first thing, I know that the past bunch of slides those were preparation before an event or incident happens, right? So once you know something is happening or you suspect something is happening, you want to immediately name an incident manager, and that person is in charge. Everyone reports to that person. They send everyone off to triage. So has something happened? What happened? Do we have any idea what's going on? I've worked at places, like once we actually had 14 minutes to triage, and then I had to brief all these executives, and we managed to solve the incident in 14 minutes. I was so impressed. It turned out, I guess I probably, because we're filming, I can't say what happened, but it turned out it was someone misusing our site in a way where they were confused and then tweeting things at us that weren't true. And we figured it all out, and then I was able to report up in a very short period of time what was wrong. And we didn't even have to do a full investigation, but just knowing like something has happened, we still suspect, we're not sure. So that's what this first step is. So then the next step is like more in depth. So usually I send everyone away for 10 minutes and like, get me as much information as you can and come back, and then we create a better plan, right? So then we go off and we look a lot deeper. So exactly what's happening, where is this coming from? Is this, on our database? What's going on? So what happened or is happening? The next thing is containment. So if something is actually still happening, you need to stop it as soon as possible. So short term, sometimes this means turning off your web app, which I know is ugly in the eyes of the business, but if something is actually actively happening, depending upon the service level agreement you have, sometimes that's the easiest thing. Sometimes you need to close certain responses or, put up a page that says, oh, we're doing maintenance for the next 10 minutes. If you can stop an attack partway through, congratulations, that's awesome. But if not, then you want to do containment long term. And sometimes it means bringing the app down. Sometimes it means taking some of the functionality offline for a little while you figure out what's going on. This will depend on your incident, but you definitely need to make sure that no more damage is done once you've found out what's going on. Next, you want to eradicate. So once you've stopped whatever is happening, you figure out what's happened. You need to make sure that there's no one living on your network. You need to make sure that no one has control over your app, that no one's created users in their own name so they can still come back and access things later. You need to make sure that the threat is eradicated. And then you want to do recovery. So you want to repair the systems, restore systems, repair damage, and you need to bring your business back online as fast as possible. Yeah, if at all possible, undo every single thing that's been done. This will, again, depend on the specifics of the exact incident you're doing. And then lastly, so once everything seems to be okay and the business is going, once everyone's had time to go home and rest, you want to do a post-mortem. So we need to ensure we learn from our mistakes. I worked somewhere once, and this is how I launched my first AppSec program. We had a whole bunch of incidents over the course of a year, and we had a post-mortem after each one, and I ended up putting them into 5 different types of groups, and some of it was like, things that could not be avoided, but a whole bunch of them, I'd say around 30%, were application security related, and they're really simple things to fix. And when I explained, if we just give developers some tools and a little training, like none of these will happen anymore. And I explained how much it cost to manage those incidents and how much time it took and what the risk was. When I presented it, they're like, start now, right now. And that's how I launched my first AppSec program. So it's really, really important that you do a postmortem after every incident and that you learn from your mistakes. And one more thing, that you perform blameless postmortem is really, really, really important. That after an incident is over, that it's not Sarah or it's not Bob or Alice's fault. It's what safeguard wasn't there, what policy didn't exist, or what training did they not receive that allowed these things to happen. When we point fingers at specific people, they don't trust us anymore. They feel afraid to tell us when things are wrong. And like I figured out the hard way, it breaks trust, right? And it's really, really important that the rest of IT trusts the security team, especially in time of emergency. So please perform blameless postmortems. Whenever we have a giant outage, we like to publicly show all the things we've done. So if you're interested in seeing like why Azure went down and what lessons we've learned from things, we have a blog where we publish everything. I know that might sound weird, but it really helps us learn we hope that we're helping the industry. And also I don't know how to explain, but it's getting stuff off your chest like that can be helpful. Okay, so conclusion. Application security is hard, but we got this. Sorry, I skipped ahead. If you prepare for incidents, if you do a whole bunch of step 1, you will not need to do very much step 2. When you prepare for things, you will find all sorts of things wrong, and hopefully you will fix them. And then you will end up with less incidents. And when you have an incident, you will be able to solve it in 14 minutes or some shorter period of time with less damage because you're ready, right? And I personally think that preparing for incidents is a very, 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 very valuable activity, and I wouldn't want to work somewhere if that's not the case, if they're not going to give me time to prepare for these things. And with that, I want to give you a few resources. So I was going to tell you if you have questions about specific things and just have links, but then I decided instead, if there's a thing like a product or something that I mentioned, you should search for it in your favorite search tool, and mine is DuckDuckGo, and learn more about it and train yourself. There's lots of free things online, and I can't go into every single topic, but I can give you a bunch of links about how to get started learning about application security. This is a blog post I wrote up with several different resources that are all free, and I'm going to keep adding to this over time. So either I learned AppSec from these resources or I built them because they didn't exist yet. So I am hoping that this blog post helps you. And then lastly, I'd like to kindly suggest that you follow me. I have a blog where I release all my security research, and then I have a show on Sundays where I stream myself doing various DevSecOps activities, and we have a lot of fun. And with that, I would like to invite all of you to... I see questions. Interesting. Your audio is looping. I'm here in hopes of hearing some Canadian accents. Yes.
Right, should I just type the questions? What's that?
Okay, so questions will be heard at the end.
I can just type them if it's easier. Who's got questions?
Let's see if anyone has any questions.
Just
So,
let me know, I'll
hi.
type it for
Hey,
you.
Takaharu. Hi, I hope you're well.
So I wanted to ask,
Okay, so if anyone has questions, now is the time to put it in here. And I'm going to check over here and see what's happening over here.
so
I don't know how they do questions.
Let's change it.
okay,
I'm not exactly sure how they do questions on YouTube. But sorry, we fixed the problem.
is this working? Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see it. I see it one. So I don't know. Okay, so.
Hello, does this work?
And we'll ask on your behalf. So what if the payload has PII? Oh, that's really tricky. I see your question, Manu. Generally, I try to keep the payload in the logs because I see all sorts of things happening on
Looks
the
like there's
screen
like a
here.
30-second delay.
I generally save the payload because it's important. And the payload is the attack. So that's what someone put into my web app to try to attack me. It's more what your app responds with that's more likely to have personal identifiable information. So when I say I want you to save the payload, that would be something like, single quote equals 1 equals 1, or something like that, as opposed to, Tanya, Janca, born on this day, blah, blah, blah. Right? So I don't know if that helps you, but if the payload does have personal identifiable information, that means that the attacker knew that. And either they got it from a previous attack that they did on your app, or they already knew it, which is disconcerting. So I'm going to look and see if there are any questions on Twitch. So ready for QA? We can try over YouTube stream, otherwise I'll post them here. Sounds good. Great, so let's see if there are any questions there, and I'm on Mixer. Hi, Takaharu. It's so nice to see you. I mean, even if I just see your username, it's great. Okay, so how does the IR process change when you are doing platform as a service and software as a service applications and you don't have access to the standard instant response investigation tools? So this is going to be an Azure biased answer because unfortunately I only, truly honestly, actually have significant experience with Azure. I don't know AWS very well and I don't know GCP very well. However, I suspect that they're similar because mostly we're all copying each other. If we're being honest, all the cloud providers are like, that's a great idea, we should do that too. So if you're using platform as a service, so to give you an example, devslop.co is running on an app service, which is a platform as a service. And then I can use application insights to see into it. I also can see everything in the security dashboard, which is called Azure Security Sensor. I can turn on threat protection and it sees when it's being attacked to a certain extent. And then on top of that, I can also create something called playbooks, which is an automated responses. So if something has happened previously to your app or an attack, you can recognize it and then create an automated response. You can have it run scripts or shut down the app. So you can script what you want to have happen. And that includes anything that you have the power to do in Azure. And you can get it to automatically respond when it sees similar activities. Can you post a link in your chat for getting started in AppSec? Absolutely. I'm going to post all of the links. So I'm going to do this. So I'm going to put it here. And I'm going to put it in here too. And here too. And then I'm going to put the other link as well. Okay, and back here, links for getting started in application security. Okay, awesome. Here, and here, and here. Awesome, thank you. And let's see, so does anyone have more questions? Sorry, we had a problem, fixed it. Questions here, thank you. Oh, thank you. Thanks for watching. I'm so excited people tuned in. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And yes, I'm sure you probably heard some pretty serious Canadian accent happening. I'm told my accent's really, really strong, and that I say a on the end of a lot of sentences, and that I say about instead of about, even though I don't think that's true. Enough people have told me I think it might be true. Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Well, I don't know who's hearing me or not, but thanks very much to Tanya. I guess we could give her a round of applause. I'm not sure if you'll, but let's do it anyways.